Hello and welcome to the Round the Bases. I'm your host, Ted Sorenson. As you can imagine, this show is all about the world of Wisconsin sports. Tonight, we'll be touching on the views of the average sports fan and adding in our own commentary. Alongside me in the Ultimate Sports Fans Hangout are one of Milwaukee's finest sportscasters. I'm very fortunate to be joined by ESPN radio host, very excitable, somewhat unpredictable, Mitch Thunder Nellis.
Thanks for having me, Ted. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you for joining me. How are you doing this evening?
I am doing great. I'm just ready to get rolling.
That's great to hear. Now we'll move on to the Green Bay Packers first and foremost. Let's get that started. Now, the Green Bay Packers free agency right around the corner. Obviously, the biggest name on the list for the Green Bay Packers is Greg Jennings. Now, how do you see that playing out? And what do you see the Packers doing? Are they going to let Greg Jennings go, or are they going to let him walk to another team, perhaps within the division? How do you see that playing out? And more importantly, what's the biggest priority for Green Bay as they head into the offseason?
Well, Ted, first with the Greg Jennings question, I think at the end of the day, the Packers are going to have to let Greg Jennings go. We all love Greg Jennings. He's been a great part of the community here, but he's going to get money that the Packers aren't going to be able to match. The Packers aren't going to be able to pay him with contracts coming up, Clay Matthews, Aaron Rodgers, B.J. Raji. It just doesn't make sense at this point for the Packers to pay Greg Jennings. And I think somebody else is going to step up and pay him. It could be the Minnesota Vikings in division, as you mentioned. It could be the Miami Dolphins with Joe Philbin, so that sense of familiarity. When it comes to the Packers and what do they need, that's a tough question because they have so many weapons, but they also have so many needs. And so when you look at the Packers, you're looking at defense, first of all. We all saw Kaepernick and the 49ers put 42 points on him. But so do you look at the defensive line? Do you look at the defensive backfield? And you still have to help Aaron Rodgers. If you're going to lose Greg Jennings, you've lost Donald Driver, who didn't do a whole lot, but at least he was there. You could lose Jermichael Finley.
Right.
How do you help the offense stay competitive with the other teams in the NFC as well?
Absolutely. That's a very valid point. And, you know, a common sentiment I've been hearing is that the Packers are one of the few teams that have the depth to be able to replace, a top 15 receiver that Greg Jennings does represent. We were able to send a camera crew to Green Bay.
Nice. And
we were able to get, what we're all about is getting the fans and their common opinions. So let's take a look at what some of the Packers fans had to say.
I think we have the best receiving core in the NFL by far. I don't know why, if you were Greg Jennings or anybody, why you'd ever want to leave here. It's just such a great place to play. And I feel like we could keep paying them and just keep up such a great receiving core that we have.
With the emergence of Randall Cobb and James Jones this year, as well as Jordy, obviously, I'd be very surprised if Greg Jennings was a Packer next year.
Well, I think Greg Jennings is probably actually on his way out as well. I mean, he hasn't been a huge impact player this year, especially with his injuries earlier on. And I mean, we have plenty of good receivers. We have Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb, who's just become an exploding star. I think we'll be just fine even if we do end up losing Jennings.
I will go with it starts with the offensive line. We've proven this year already that you can bring up the 4th, 5th, and 6th running back, and they'll succeed as long as you have the offensive line. Don Barclay has obviously been a big improvement at right tackle at this point. Balaga's injury always hurts, but as long as you can have the offensive line, you could pretty much put almost anybody. You've got a practice squad guy right now running for 4 yards, 5 yards a carry who's got a lot of fresh legs and is doing really well with Juwan Harris. So I think it comes with the offensive line. I would like to have a running back, but if you could get depth at the offensive line, I think it's going to help.
Well, I think they should definitely invest in, an early round pick for getting a running back. That's something that's kind of been detrimental to the team. I mean, we've always been a passing team, but the running game has never been, our key note. But McCarthy does do a great job of honoring the run at very least. So it'd really be good to have somebody who could have some better production than Cedric Benson or Alex Green.
There's a lot of great ideas from the always faithful, always very fervent fan base up in Green Bay.
And I got to say knowledgeable.
Absolutely.
It was great to hear what some of those fans had to say in terms of knowledge. It's not just the Packers fans aren't just there to be pretty faces. They know their football.
Very knowledgeable fan base indeed. Now let's look at some of the other Green Bay free agents this year. We have Sam Shields. He's a restricted free agent. He actually played 606 snaps in 2012, so he's on the defense. He's out there in that nickel package quite often.
They're keeping Shields. I mean, Shields is part of their future. They have to keep Sam Shields.
Okay. Other free agents restricted as well as Everin Dietrich Smith, played a lot of center, can kind of switch in between center and guard there on that offensive line.
Yeah, again, and one of the guys in the package we saw there said it, that you want to look for depth on that offensive line. EDS stays as well, partly because he can play multiple positions, but also because he's going to be a starter next year.
That seems to be right along the line.
And Aaron Rodgers likes him, so if Aaron Rodgers likes you, that's kind of an in.
That's nothing but a good thing. And another name that was mentioned right there in that interview is Cedric Benson. What do the Packers do at running back? That's traditionally been a position of weakness for them.
I have no idea. You never know what Ted Thompson's going to do at running back. I'd be surprised if Cedric Benson came back, but it wouldn't surprise me if they brought another veteran back. Dwan Harris seems to be in the mix. James Starks could be in the mix as well, but with his injury history, it's hard to really rely on him. I know one name that John Clayton from ESPN threw out a couple days ago in his mailbag was Steven Jackson. Steven Jackson, a free agent with the St. Louis Rams. It's not really the move that Ted Thompson tends to make, but if you can get him at 1 year, $5 million, he can block, he can pass catch, and he can run the ball. Why not give it a shot and see if having a real running back actually makes a difference, because it's been too long since somebody really contributed and they had a workhorse back there.
Oh, absolutely. Another names out there, Ahmad Bradshaw, Reggie Bush, Chris Ivory from the Saints. So there's actually plenty of good options out there in free agency, and typically it's not Ted Thompson move to make many splashes in free agency, but I guess we'll have to stay posted. It seems that they might want to address running back this offseason.
Yeah, well, as fans, we all think that. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what Ted Thompson does. As we've seen for years, what the fans want is not necessarily what Ted Thompson does. Usually it works out, not always. I remember when they drafted Jordy Nelson in the second round. We all thought, what is going on out here? They seem to be strong at wide receiver. Well, I'd say Jordy's worked out pretty well.
Now, speaking of the draft, I've been looking at a couple of mock drafts, all addressing these positions that we've been talking about. Running back, I saw a couple of mock drafts with centers listed.
Sure.
A few of those names, Eddie Lacy, running back from Alabama. We have Monte Ball, of course. Barrett Jones, the great center of Alabama.
Yep.
And actually, one mock draft I saw was Zach Ertz out of Stanford, the tight end. Now, what do you think that says about the tight end position in Green Bay and Jermichael Finley's future?
It means whoever did that mock draft believes that Jermichael Finley is gone. And certainly at an $8.25 million cap number, it might make sense for the Packers to part ways with Jermichael Finley, especially as the season got to an end last year. He seemed to have better hands, but he also seemed to not make any big plays, not be that explosive player that he had been earlier in his career. Mrs. Thunder actually went to Stanford, so I think I watched every single Stanford football game this year. Zach Ertz is a very good player. Kobe Fleener had an okay rookie year with the Colts. Zach Ertz, very similar to Kobe. He'd be good, but you're also looking at Andrew Corliss coming back from injury. That could help the tight end position and help alleviate a Jermichael Finley loss.
So there is a bit of organizational depth that they do have, and maybe there are some guys that can plug in and hope they can replace some of that production if Finley is to leave.
Right.
Now, a common sentiment also from Green Bay fans was a little bit of disappointment with Dom Capers and the way defense.
Not a little bit.
You're right. Maybe a little bit more. Their numbers actually weren't too bad. They finished 11th in the NFL in total defensive rankings, giving up an average of 451 yards a game. Obviously, the points are what matters, and they gave up 45 in that loss to San Francisco. So what do you think is the future of Dom Capers? Is this his last chance here in Green Bay to make a chance and really improve things, turn it around?
I think it is. And I'm actually surprised they're bringing him back for one more. I thought after the debacle in San Francisco, that might be it. If they can capitalize on the depth that they built from last year's draft, supplemented this year with a couple free agents and some more draft picks. Nick Perry gets healthy, Jarrell Worthy gets healthy, and if they can have an impact, the defense could be decent. But there's still a lot of holes in that defense that Dom Capers isn't doing a good enough job to cover up, and so it's still a concern for Packers fans.
All right, and from the gridiron to the hard court, let's move from the Packers to the Bucs, and let's take a look at some of the Bucs highlights so far this season.
Give it up to Jennings. Julius over screen. Jennings with the drive and leading to the lane. Jennings with the step back. Less than 15 seconds to play here in the quarter. Here's a takeaway by Jennings. He has time. Lays it.
Alden stopped going pretty deep into his bench early when his team was playing well also. What a pass! At Udo and Larry Sanders.
Sanders. Now Jennings. Larry Sanders into the paint for the lefty hook. Yes.
As he scores, Jim Heath is the best scorer on that team, even though Lopez leads him in scoring. Pick and roll. Beautiful.
That wraparound attempt at a knockaway. Now the ball is loose. Picked by Ellis. Ahead for Dunleavy. And he got that. Ellis.
On a consistent basis.
Lopez has 13 points.
But Larry Sanders certainly the fan favorite there, and so he's been a great addition on defense for the team. Another question.
And we're very pleased to be joined by WISN 12 longtime
Do you
sports
want a hug?
director Dan Needham.
No hugging.
Okay.
No hugging out here on this set. But Dan, what are your thoughts on the Bucks, and what do you think they do with Brandon Jennings? Is there a potential trade that needs to be worked out, or are they just going to let him potentially walk in free agency?
I think they wait and see who all's interested. I heard the Mavericks are interested. You know more teams will be. Are any of the top teams out there right now, are they a point guard away from the title or a point guard away from being able to compete with the Heat? And you play them off each other. And if it's not enough, fine. The Bucks aren't desperate in that situation. They can just match any offer next year. They're okay. It's the Ellis situation where their hand is being played out, you know, without having many chips at the table.
See, and to Dan's point about that, the first thing I worry about is that I don't think either of those guys is really a point guard, but I think Monte Ellis is almost more of a point guard than Brandon Jennings, and that they're playing out of position because it's been Brandon Jennings' team. And so with Monte Ellis coming in, he's kind of had to change his game. We saw in the game right before the All-Star break, the one against Philly, Monte Ellis had a great game, getting to the basket and making driving shot after driving shot. That's his game, but he needs the ball in his hands to be able to do that. I ship Brandon Jennings out. I think it's time. I just, you know, whether we go through this soap opera again year after year, I'm just tired of the Brandon Jennings. Will he stay? Won't he stay? Will he want max money? Should the Bucks match? Is he a point guard? Is he a two guard? What is he? Because he's actually a pretty good three-point shooter. He's just so little that you can't put him at the two guard. I'm ready to be done with him. And if that means you have to take some cents on the dollar when he leaves to bring somebody back or to make the long-term health of the franchise better, I'm ready to make that sacrifice. Well, and I might be wrong, but I'm willing to take that risk.
How do you sell that to the fans, though?
And that's,
if you get rid of both Ellis and Jennings,
right,
you're just throwing everything away.
And I don't know that you are. And I've heard from a lot of fans over the past couple of weeks, Herb Cole and John Steinmiller and John Hammond are worried that people aren't going to come. But I think Bucks fans are finally smart enough that they know that Jennings and Ellis aren't the future. That together they're not the future. Now maybe you keep Ellis for a year and you give him the ball, you give him the reins of the offense, and then you see what happens. But I think there's a lot of fans out there who just believe that Brandon Jennings is not going to be a success here in Milwaukee. He's not the right fit. You can't have him as your best player on a team because it means your team isn't very good. And they're willing to deal with a year or two of struggling if it means your team can end. And you have to get lucky. And no one's guaranteeing luck. I mean, Oklahoma City not only got lucky that Greg Oden stunk and Kevin Durant was great, but then Russell Westbrook ended up being Russell Westbrook. And he didn't have a position in college. All of a sudden, he's a great pro.
Yeah.
But at some point, you have to take that risk because you know what you have right now isn't going to be successful.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem to be too successful. Obviously, Jennings and Ellis have had somewhat of a down year. They're actually combining for 34 shot attempts per game and only averaging 39.7% on those attempts. So you could call them chuckers. You know, they're certainly not afraid to shoot the ball, and Jennings' numbers in particular have been down this year, only shooting 36.7% from three. So you're right, he may not be the answer as a point guard and definitely not as a playmaker. You know, in my own opinion, I do think that they should look to make a trade. It does not seem like he's happy here in Milwaukee. And as Dan, you bring up Monte Ellis, he does have an option for next year at $11 million. Do you think there are any potential suitors that would be willing to pay him that $11 million contract?
It all depends on who thinks they are a player in the NBA. You know, I mean, when you look at the league right now, is anybody going to beat Miami the way that the league is set up? No, I don't think so.
I mean, the Thunder have a shot, but the Heat are the favorite for sure.
And if there is a team, you know, the Knicks don't really have a screaming need for a scorer. All they've got is scorers. Right. But any of the other contenders, if there's that one player, couldn't you bring Monte Ellis off the bench and be dynamic, you know, like Miami did with Ray Allen?
And to that point, Last year, there were rumors that the Bucks were looking to possibly flip Monte Ellis to Orlando when they still had Dwight Howard. And what a good fit that would have been. Now, I don't think they would have been good enough to beat Miami at the time, but it sure would have made Orlando feel like they were a player, having Monte Ellis paired with Dwight Howard.
Absolutely. Now, as we look ahead and we look at what kind of direction the Bucks might be taking, with the potential departures of Jennings and potentially Ellis, how do you see the players like Ersan Ilyasova, Larry Sanders, Mike Dunleavy? How do they all fit in? And more importantly, who's the franchise, put as their face? Who's going to be the star moving forward, and who are they going to build around?
See, that's the problem. If you trade Jennings, who is that guy? I agree with Mitch. I don't know if Brandon Jennings is a franchise player. He's not a max contract guy, but he's the best you have right now. So if you get rid of him, let's say Ersan Ilyasova gets traded. The Raptors and the Nets apparently are interested. What if you get rid of Ellis? What if you get rid of everybody at the break, okay? Who is the face of the franchise? Larry Sanders? This is a guy who's transformed himself this year.
But he he's already the #1 fan favorite.
Right, but this is also a guy that last year you're worried about anger management issues. Is to me, he's the kind of player that you don't build a franchise team around, but he's the kind of guy you can win a championship with if he's like the 4th or 5th player.
Right.
But okay, what if the Bucks trade all these guys to get first-round picks next year? Go heavy in the lottery. Who are they going to get? Nerlens Noel coming off a torn ACL?
Right.
Some other players that have very little experience that aren't going to come in and win right away. So then you go through the same exact cycle.
You have to get lucky.
They're in year 3 or 4 of their contract, and then they start to break out a little bit. Then they want the max contract, and you have to trade them too.
It's hard. Yeah. It's a hard situation in the NBA. The Oklahoma City Thunder, small market team, but got lucky with the players. The Bucks have to get lucky, but we know they're not getting lucky with Jennings and Ellis. And, who else is coming to Milwaukee to supplement Jennings and Ellis? I don't see anybody coming to help them, and I don't think they're good enough. Now, to think about that as a fan, that sucks. All right, that's just not exciting. That hurts because you want your team to succeed, but if we're talking long-term success over short-term success, sometimes you do have to blow it up. And I'm not saying trade everybody, but if they can get pieces back, maybe you do trade everybody.
Now, real quickly, 30 seconds or less, is Jim Boylan the coach next year? And more importantly, what are their needs going into the offseason? Big men, defensive needs, etc. What do you guys think?
I say no, and I say a true point guard.
I don't think he will be back. They need a scorer. I should say they need more shooters. They have plenty of scorers right now. They need more shooters.
All right. With opening day just weeks away, let's look ahead to the Milwaukee Brewers and their upcoming 2013 campaign. Our camera crew went to Price's Sports Memorabilia to ask Brewers fans their thoughts on the relatively unproven starting rotation.
Okay, I think the most encouraging thing about the Brewers pitching staff this year is everybody else is asking about the young pitchers. So it sounds like everybody else likes their young pitchers, so why don't the Brewers use those young pitchers?
I think that I think the spring training is going to answer a lot of those questions. We're going to be able to see Narveson coming back and actually playing and being involved in the everyday life as opposed to just coming back at the end of the year. So you got him in there, and then of course you got Willie Peralta, who came in as a rookie last year and did extremely well for the short time that he was able to play. So I mean, with those two guys vying for the 4 and the 5, you throw Mark Rogers in there. So I think the spring training is going to be really important. But I think if they have to be forced to keep Rogers with how injury prone in the past our pitching rotation has been, I think it'll be nice to keep somebody with a quality pitcher like that in the major league level, so we don't lose him, and we can have him as a long reliever, which is a role that Estrada had a couple years ago and really flourished in that role.
You don't want to lose him because if they tried to get him in the minors, somebody else would probably pick him up because he looked pretty promising. Everybody's always looking for pitching.
You might call it unproven, you might call it something else. Now, Dan, your knowledge of the Brewers is second to none. We all know the bullpen had its share of struggles last year, but what about the starting pitching? What should Brewers fans expect from the likes of Fiers, Peralta, Mark Rogers, and others?
You could have realistic expectations or unrealistic, and it's hard to know because when you think about it, Mark Rogers started 7 games. Willie Peralta, not much more. Mike Fiers, 16? It was a limited amount of time, and they pitched well in spurts, but not every game. It's not like Rogers came in and shut down opponents in every single game. He beat the Astros, which was great. It was the Astros. Is that reality, or was it against a tougher team like Washington, where he also pitched well? Mike Fiers, through his first, 10 starts, was phenomenal.
ERA under 2.
Yeah, he had a perfect game through 6 innings against the Reds. And then at the end of the year, he really faded. So, okay, let's say those guys all pitch the way everybody expects them to. And that's one of the great success stories of the year in baseball. What if they don't? Where do they turn? You know, Chris Narveson is the only legitimate choice, I think, right now. And then you've got more unproven guys in the bullpen. I think it's a tremendous risk for the Brewers, but there is some reward hanging out there. You know, it's not like they have to live on pitching. They have an offense that's really good. But when pitching is a question mark both at the front end and the back end, boy, that's taking a chance.
Right. So how are you feeling about those 1 to 3 starters? Obviously, we mentioned Giovanni Gallardo. 25 quality starts last year. Can't really ask for much more out of him. Marco Estrada, to me, seems a bit of a question mark. They're penciling him in as the number 2 right now. He did have 9.3 strikeouts per 9 innings pitched. That's actually a better rate than Giovanni put up last year. And a 3.64 ERA. Do you think he continues to improve and really put together another solid season?
Kind of like Dan said with the rest of the guys, with Fiers and Rogers, I don't think we have any idea about Marco Estrada either. Marco Estrada is a nice pitcher. I believe a lot of us felt more comfortable as Brewers fans with him as your long middle relief guy because he was really good at that role. When he started, he had some good starts. He had some not so good starts. And after Giovanni, the entire pitching staff, starting with Estrada and with all the young guys, they're all question marks. And with young pitchers, we just have no idea. Like Dan said, if they can all pitch to their top capabilities, it's going to be one of the success series of the year, and the Brewers are going to make the playoffs, maybe win the division, and make some hay in the playoffs. But things can go really poorly really quickly with bad pitchers. And if we're sitting in the middle of May with 3 guys with ERAs around 6, that's a really bad situation to be in.
No question about there. There will be no Zach Greinke. There will be no other players, you know, to kind of complement Giovanni. It's a lot of unproven guys, as I did say. Another position that we're really wondering about is that 5th spot. Is it going to be Peralta, Mark Rogers, Tyler Thornburg, excuse me, and they all had limited appearances last year to limited success. So who do you think fills out that last spot in the rotation?
It's funny to go from 2 years ago when they went to the playoffs, 6 guys started games, and that's it. This year we may have 6 starters by the end of April. Who knows? And that may not even be played out all the way through spring training because of the World Baseball Classic and everything getting thrown off. I don't know if the Brewers will actually know by the end of spring training whether it's Peralta, Rogers, Thornburg. He seems to be more of a long shot. I think Fiers and Estrada behind Gallardo are pretty well established, just based on last year. It's the other 2. And what about Chris Narveson?
Right. I mean, is he healthy, and what can he do?
He's coming back from a torn rotator cuff. Now, you know, it used to be that was the end of your career. Now I know medicine has made these guys come back. It's the Adrian Peterson effect in sports. Right. But can you really count on him to be back where he was just a year after that? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
And for one question mark to the other, let's talk about the bullpen. They did get rid of Manny Parra, Cameron Lowe, K-Rod, you know, those guys are all gone from this year's team. They brought in a couple of left-handed hurlers, Gorzlani and Gonzalez, both appearing with the Nationals last year. Both with somewhat of a decent record, obviously Gorzlani putting an under 3 ERA. So the Brewers do figure to improve somewhat in the bullpen. What are your thoughts? Do you think that's an actual meaningful contribution?
The bullpen all starts with the back end. It's all about John Axford. If John Axford can have the type of season he had 2 years ago, or like the last 2 months of the year last year, everything else falls into place. It's amazing when you have solid pitchers at the back end, how everything falls into place. If he struggles again, if he's the John Axford he was in the first half of the season last year, then everybody's going to be a mess.
Henderson, I thought, looked so good when he came up last year. And I don't, again, it's like the 3 young starting pitchers. We saw at the end of the year what they did. And some of those games were meaningful, but you want to see him do it over an entire year. And there's a reason why Henderson hasn't been up to the majors until age 37 or whatever he is. Right. He's the rookie.
He's almost as old as you do.
Almost, not quite. No, he looked great, and he looked great in the minors at the end of last year, but can he do it for an entire year? Heck, last year, with K-Rod and Axford, you figured you were absolutely tight at that end of the bullpen. Nobody's going to get to you if you get to that point. And then they ended up being the worst bullpen in the majors. Yep. Gorzolani and Gonzalez, It used to be if the Brewers brought in a left-hander, he's coming in to face one batter and that's it. Apparently these guys can both get righties and lefties out.
We can only hope.
Yeah, if they fail, where do the Brewers turn? Again, they go back to the minor leagues and more untried players.
Well, I'm sure Brewers fans will be sitting on pins and needles this year, hoping that bullpen does improve. We did mention Axford's struggles. 9 blown saves last year, an ERA over 4.5. They can't have that. Real quickly, guys, under 30 seconds. Carlos Gomez and Noriayuki were pleasant surprises last year. Who do you see really being a breakout candidate for this year?
I guess I'll throw Gene Segura just because he's young, and if he plays, he could be. But I'm kind of wait and see. You know, I don't know that they have anybody. They have the pieces in place right now to succeed on offense. I don't know that there needs to be a breakout guy.
Well, it may be that they need Matt Gamble to finally be that breakout guy. He's been around a long time, and he's been full of promise.
Make or break for him.
That's right. And if he doesn't show it quick, Corey Hart's back, and Gamble might be out of chances.
Well, that's all we have for you all tonight. I hope you enjoyed. I'd like to thank Dan Needles and Mitch Nellis for taking times out of their busy schedules and joining us. Thank you for your insight. And we'd also like to thank Price's Sports Memorabilia for providing us with these awesome set details. Couldn't have done the show without you. So that's all we have for you guys tonight. Have a good night, Wisconsin.